Dricus Du Plessis is not getting the love he deserves, and this weekend against Israel Adesanya, he can get that respect with a win. Today, Dan Tom of MMA Junkie is joining the show to talk about UFC 305. We're going to dive into the Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya fight. We're going to talk about Steve Erceg, Kai France, Mateusz Gamrot. We're going to talk about the thing, all of it. So guess what? Let's tune in and get live, baby. UFC 305, Dricus Du Plessis and Israel Adesanya. The shoe's kind of on the other foot. So Dan, this fight's kind of an odd situation. We were supposed to have this before the whole Strickland saga, and then we got Du Plessis beating Strickland. Now Du Plessis the champ. My first question really kind of is, Dricus Du Plessis doesn't seem like he's getting the respect he deserves. Will a win over Israel Adesanya kind of provide that kind of validation, kind of like when Jan Blachowicz beat Adesanya?
I think it will, and I will say though, I don't know if even Jan gets the respect he deserves. Although we haven't seen Jan in a while, and that could be why I'm feeling that way. But to your point, which is a good one, I don't think, and one that I agree with, I don't think he's getting the respect he deserves as a fighter either. And I think a lot of it is because, and I almost laughed. I had a colleague almost compare him to Pantoja in the sense that these guys look like vulnerable champions. They look like they're constantly either going to lose or they're gassing out after a round, and yet they find a way to do it. And, I always complain about Pantoja as far as champions not getting respect they deserve. I feel like he's top of the list, by the way. But if I'm going to keep that energy, well, I got to keep that same energy when it comes to Dricus Du Plessis, who not as, technical a division, not as technical a fighter as Pantoja, but he shares that kind of hardship where, he doesn't look like he's doing well, but he fights very effectively. That's what the criteria is aimed to reward. And in general, as a general meta, I mean, that's what fighting rewards. Who's the most effective? It's not who's the most technical. It's not who's the most prettiest. It's who's the most effective, and Du Plessis has proven he's pretty effective in there.
I think you nailed it spot on with the Pantoja comparison, because both of the guys are very good at getting beat up. They can take a bunch of punishment and dish it back. We saw that with the Dricus Du Plessis Darren Till fight, to where Du Plessis had that great first round, and then Till comes back roaring and just battering Du Plessis, kind of had him on the back foot. And I think about that fight, Dan. Now that I mention it, I'm thinking about that fight, and that's something that Adesanya can bring to the table, kind of that sniper game plan. Now, I'm of the mindset that Israel Adesanya has kind of regressed a little bit. I don't think he's as complicated of a fighter as he once was. That said, and we're going to talk about that in a second, the game plan of Darren Till is pretty straightforward. 1-2. He's very, very just 1-2 oriented. He doesn't kick much and do anything. He waits and he wants to land the cross over the top or right down the middle. I think that's not past Israel Adesanya. So Du Plessis is not going to have an easy fight here, even though I think Adesanya is a little bit over the hill. This isn't going to be an easy fight for him, and I think beating a name like Israel Adesanya, this kind of gives me a Chris Weidman vibe, except it wasn't Dricus Du Plessis beating Adesanya. Instead, it was like Sean Strickland beating Adesanya for Du Plessis, who went life and death with that. If you follow what I'm saying, kind of like the whole Anderson shouldn't have lost to Chris Weidman, and in the second fight, we know how it ended, but Chris Weidman looked good. Do you feel like this is one of those fights that can have Dricus Du Plessis kind of show out and have one of those career-defining performances?
It's hard to say how much he could get with a potential win, but it's hard not to be like, if I had to, gamble on it, to borrow a term from rewatchables, regardless of how his career would play out, if he beats Adesanya, I mean, it's pretty easy to see that as his apex mountain of his career, right? Regardless of how it goes. So to your point, I think it is potentially huge. Again, it's hard to say exactly how much rub. Sometimes you don't get as much rub as you think a fighter should, and sometimes you get a lot of it. Even when you split wins and losses. Look at Alex Pereira, right? He didn't beat Izzy every time we saw them fight, but you could argue he got a lot of rub from that series, and it was, granted they also had history, fight history, but DDP, and back to this fight, Dricus Du Plessis, he brings his own history with Adesanya. Now, it's not in-fight history. It's more, it's real bad blood for whatever that's worth.
Right.
It's a much more darker topic, with the way things have gone. But it is a real rivalry nonetheless, right? There is real history there, and these ones, when you think about back in time, the bad blood matches where there's like Ortiz or Liddell, or you go way back. It's usually these kind of rivalries that stick out, for better or worse. So this could be a real important one for a lot of reasons.
So how does Dricus get it done? Adesanya is obviously a highly complicated fighter. You either have to like catch him, or you have to just be of that caliber. And I don't see Du Plessis of that caliber to be able to just go in there and defeat Israel Adesanya. He's a very smart game plan guy. He makes really good adjustments. His team makes really good reads. But what do you think that read for him is going to have to be to beat a complicated fighter like Adesanya?
Full disclosure, I'm going to reserve my right for an official pick until I finish running it through my comb here. But I could speak pretty freely on this without like the fear of unfair influence because about this time of the week I'm still waist deep in analysis while everybody's getting their prognostications and getting themselves excited, which I love, and I miss that. To be honest. But over here in the back cave, I'm still working away. That being said, I think it's pretty simple, as far as the dynamic goes. The exact X's and O's, maybe I'll have certain things to look out for later in the week. But I don't think the dynamic changes, which is pretty much make it ugly, right? That's essentially what you got to do. It's hard to parse, and I'm going to still try to, but I don't know how much I'm going to get from looking at what takedowns Adesanya defended to what he hasn't defended and comparing that forensically to what Du Plessis does. I mean, we can get lost in speculation city even with some tangible evidence. Essentially, I think it comes down to making it ugly, making it uncomfortable. If it's a clean technical counter-striking match, Du Plessis has way too many holes at that range. As far as grappling, even though Adesanya is underrated, Du Plessis is just as, if not more, accoladed on paper, and obviously has proven that it's much more a part of his style, and he can be very effective with it, both with submissions and ground and pound. So it comes to making it ugly. What if he can get it to the ground? Obviously, that's the obvious answer, right? Against a guy who's a kickboxer like Adesanya, but not necessarily like we saw with Strickland. It's that pressure. It's that keeping him in that keeping in that pressure, making it an unconventional fight. That, in theory, has always been effective, going back to boxing adages, right? You brawl the boxer, you box the brawler, right? And that's essentially the basic breakdown for this one. Can Adesanya get Du Plessis into a boxing match long enough to either knock him out or win enough rounds, or can Du Plessis turn this into his kind of fight, a brawl, and really take it all?
Man, so it's crazy. So let's move on to our next topic here, talking about Israel Adesanya. He still seems like the young guy in the UFC, but his debut was in 2018. He's now 35 years of age. Izzy's no spring chicken, and I mean, obviously, you can move past 35 years old once you get into like middleweight and stuff. But do you think Izzy's over the hill? Do you think his best days are behind him? Do you think that could be a complication in this upcoming fight?
I think it's dangerous to say, man. Even as somebody, even if let's say I run back through the tape and I see a noticeable decline, right, to where it's more than the talking point, which is the talking point is age. It's had the countdown in the background, and Du Plessis was saying, I think he's over the hill, and this and that, and he's throwing that out there, right? This is what's getting echoed. But it's dangerous, right? Because, man, as shouts to who was it Volcara France who had that stat with a 35 that was popularizing that that Luke Thomas cited, our guy. Shouts to that, but I also hate it because the MMA is the most ageist, not just sport. It's the ageist anything I've ever encountered. I feel like insurance companies are nicer on aging men and women than MMA pundits, gamblers, prognosticators, and fans alike, right? Once fighters hit their mid-30s, we're just like, oh my gosh. Yeah. And granted, that stat didn't include middleweight. That was, I believe, under welterweight, right? Welterweight and under. But even so, I feel like it's weaponized everybody's ageism now. So where if anybody's in their mid-30s, coming from a guy who just turned 39, so now I'm really feel I don't even know if you can make me biased for defending the 30-year-olds, but definitely the old people. You can make me biased there. But yeah, man, I'm always really careful, right? Because, and I don't even like to bring in personal stuff, but we don't know what these fighters are going through. And Adesanya, he hasn't been on John Jones level or anything, but there's been enough markers, right? He's had some struggles as well, or dealing with things. And you hear like, oh, I was drinking before the Strickland camp, or he was seen drinking. And when you have it on multiple accounts, including the horse's mouth, right? You got to be careful. We don't know what condition these guys are going into these fights at. So again, I could see a decline on tape, right, to fit this narrative. But is it age? What I'm seeing, right? Was it a matchup? Was it where he was? Was it a mixture of column B and column A? It really wasn't that much of column C as far as age goes. So I just be very careful with that.
Yeah, and part of it is also obviously Father Time is very much undefeated.
Sure.
But what I look at when I'm watching Israel Adesanya, I kind of take age out of it because he is a technician. He doesn't rely just on speed. He's really big into traps, using proper footwork, and staying in the right spot where he should. And what I'm seeing from Israel Adesanya, because I've obviously you do your tape studying, you go back and you look at the old Izzy against like Paulo Costa and the first Robert Whittaker you're fighting, you're like, okay, so like is Whittaker catching up, or am I like losing my mind? Because his game's really, really simplified. And I don't know if that's a byproduct of him, risk management, kind of like Canelo's done recently, to where Canelo's like, okay, I'm not doing all the fancy head movement like I did against Danny Jacobs. We're going high guard, left hook to the body, right up top. And I don't know if that's the kind of approach he's going here, but it does make it a lot less fun to watch him fight. And I feel like that's kind of where that simplification is kind of where he's gotten a lot of his hate, aside from his brash personality, because he's very brash. But like, I do feel kind of like he simplified his game a little bit, and I don't know if there's going to be enough to get him through on this fight.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's where the Anderson Silva comparisons come up, in the sense of my answer with that would be he's very, for as great of a fighter as he is in so many aspects, Adesanya, very matchmaking dependent, right? Same with Anderson Silva, was very matchmaking dependent. And it was unfair because you had this expectation that the great ones put on you, and you're just like, there's no way to live up to that. Like M. Night Shyamalan came out of the gates with The Sixth Sense, and I was a big Unbreakable nerd, and everyone's like, oh, Unbreakable sucks. And now as time goes by, Unbreakable is actually pretty good, but it was the fact that it came out after The Sixth Sense. It didn't matter how good it was. It was gonna get crapped on. And that's the same thing when you have these artists, right? Just like these filmmakers are artists by definition. These are mixed martial artists we're talking about. This isn't too much of an analogy stretch, folks. But yeah, when you come out, you paint masterpieces, you really can't live up to it no matter what you do. You know what I'm saying? Whether they are dominant ones, like he painted on the way up, or amazing comebacks, like he did with his last win over Poatan, right? So it's very tricky, man. But my answer is, I think that's where the Anderson Silva comparison comes in, and I think that's where kind of the answer lays. Now, Father Time is undefeated. That will catch up to him as well. We do need to look out for that. But I just think he's much more matchup dependent. To your point, great points there.
So you brought up your movie M. Night Shyamalan analogy. I'm gonna bring up a different one. College football. I'm from Louisiana. And we witnessed the birth of Nick Saban. We won a national championship under Nick Saban. And he left to go to the NFL. He comes back to Alabama. But following him was Les Miles. And it's hard to follow the man. And when you have Nick Saban winning national championships next door at Alabama, you're hated at school. It's a bitter pill to swallow when Les Miles won't change his ways. So it doesn't matter, because Les Miles was a great coach. He won so many games, but he's not Nick Saban, and Israel Adesanya is not pulling Robert Whittaker's or Paulo Costa's anymore. So yeah, I think that's a great point here. So we got a couple more minutes here. I don't want to keep you too long, man. Let's go ahead and move on to the co-main event here. The Master of Chaos himself, Kai Kara-France, taking on the most recent title challenger, most unlikely title challenger, Steve Erceg. Is it time for Erceg to get his roses? I felt like he got a lot of love and credit from the media and stuff when he took on Pantoja in a very close fight, but the rankings didn't reflect that. I think he stayed right around where he was. I've got him right here, but I don't think he got a boost in the ranks like he should have. And I know it's hard to, boost somebody in the rankings after a loss, but like I felt like that kind of deserved it. So is this kind of his opportunity to say, look, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to put on against a very, very tough fight in his hometown?
Yeah, I'm definitely sympathetic to that. I wasn't aware of the rankings thing. Although, I try not to get too worked up about it because I feel like I just be worked up all the time with how they do those things.
Yeah.
But I feel your sentiments there, Blaine. That being said, I do feel like he got some decent love after, not just from the media. I think from even our analyst crowd, even in a defeat, has been giving Erceg a lot of love. But yeah, he still has a bit of a ways to go. But that's not a diss, right? I mean, the dude's young. He got pushed to a title shot fast. So I think we have to remember that, whether we're enthusiasts or I don't want to say doubters, but people that just maybe are just come see, come sa, neither one way or the other about him, right? I feel like either way, you got to give him time because I think there's going to be a lot of promise there. So I do think you'll get it in due time. But to your point, it's always tricky rating someone off a loss because I'm really guilty of that. So I'm very sympathetic. Like I will go stock up on a fighter in a loss if they show certain things. Very sympathetic to that, my friend. So I don't blame you for framing it that way.
Yeah, like I feel like Erceg's a lot better than his loss showed. I think Pantoja's, like we mentioned earlier, Alessandro Pantoja's almost invincible. Like you can't put him away for love nor money. And like he had that straight that combination against Matt Schnell. And you're like, wow, this is really good. But like you go back and look, and it's like a bunch of rear naked chokes. He got like arm triangles and a bunch of submissions. So like there's more to this guy's game than just knocking somebody out, which is what the UFC is going to build their highlight package on. And I think we kind of saw that against Pantoja. Now that said, that kind of game that gave Erceg a hard time, Kai Kara-France, he's a bit more disposable than Pantoja, but Kai Kara-France does bring that type of fight.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you mentioned Erceg's grappling, not to sleep on that. I think that's an important point because that could be the potential separator here. Now, Kai Kara-France has gotten better. We've seen him in bad positions against, guys who maybe didn't age that well, like is it not Bonfim? It's the younger, that's 25-pound, 35-pound guy. But he got his back and he was able to survive that and then knock him out. Bontarine, that's who it is.
Yeah,
Bonfim.
that's
no wonder
right.
why I was getting those two confused.
Yeah.
Bontarine, didn't age well, but that guy was like, I believe, a second or third degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. That was his position. So he's been able to survive those positions before. That's traditionally been Kai Kara-France's weakness. So I'll be curious to see if Steve Erceg tries to show more of that game. Otherwise, I feel like it's, I got to reserve my right for a pick here. But gun in my head, I don't disagree, nor am I surprised to see Erceg favor. But I almost feel like there's some quiet value on Kai Kara-France here as well. So especially if this turns into a flyweight firefight. So I'm really excited for this fight.
That's really the best fight on the card, if you ask me, because it's just two really good technicians that are violent. All right, I'm real short on time now. Last topic. Mateusz Gamrot is taking on Dan Hooker. Gamrot's on a really good winning streak, man. He's got it going, and Hooker hasn't looked great in his last two, even though he's won. What's the gain from Mateusz Gamrot here, who is like on the precipice of a title shot with just maybe 2 wins and a good quality when you can get him there? What's the gain here from fighting somebody like Dan Hooker, who is kind of been a wild card either way and not in a neutral environment like in Dan Hooker's hometown?
Not a lot, and I hate to be a downer, but the more I think about this matchup, the less I like it. I mean, initially it strikes me as a stay busy matchup, which I think is a very fair statement in a deep 155-pound division. But Gamrot's already done the reservation things that you don't see a lot of fighters do, which is kind of surprising with the way the UFC prioritizes running their shows and needs to keep things busy. But you see Gamrot do those stand-in positions that usually guarantee other fighters title shots when they play the reserve. And even though Gamrot has lost his way to a lot of fights, as a lot of analysts like myself will definitely say, at the same time, because of that, I think it's even worse because Dan Hooker, even if you're not a guy like Mateusz Gamrot who gets dropped and somehow wins rounds, Dan Hooker is a guy who will lose but have big moments. So I'm seeing a Mateusz Gamrot win here, but even that doesn't do much for him because, unless he finishes him, but even if he does finishes him with the caveat of he's probably going to get dropped and knocked down a couple times by a dangerous Dan Hooker, and people are going to use that against him too, which I won't, die on a hill for Gamrot by any means, but at the same time, a win's a win. And if you're asking me honestly, Blaine, I don't see what he has to gain from this kind of a win.
Yeah, I agree. Dan, I appreciate it, man. My son's begging me to go watch Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, so guess what I'm about to go do? Oh, yeah, I haven't seen it yet, so I'm excited.
I got to catch up on that, too.
Nice. I'll let you know how it is. So yes, where can everybody, what do you got, what content you got coming? Where can everybody find you at, my man?
MMA Junkie and Action Network, who employs me, the Protect Your Neck podcast on all podcast platforms. And then if you're on the Substack or the YouTubes, you can catch me there at Dan Tom MMA, which is also my handle on all the socials. Make it easy, at Dan Tom MMA. Thank you, Blaine, so much, man. I really enjoyed chatting with you. I almost wish we could chat more, man, but
yeah, for sure, dude. For sure.